Hey everyone, it's Tim here, checking in for a midweek update, and I hope you're doing well. I want to share a reflection on something. It's kind of the director's cut bonus content from what we talked about in our equipping hour on Sunday. There are a couple of things I wanted to talk more about. It was a massive topic, marriage in the Bible, to cover in just a little over an hour, and so we had to be pretty quick on some things. But one thing that I thought was a really cool connection, just regarding how marriage is so intimately related with both the fall. It's such an area where the curse and sin has taken a ruinous effect, but also how it's involved in picturing redemption. And we've talked both lessons now about how Ephesians 5 verse 32, Paul, in his very practical teaching on marriage, on husbands and wives relating to one another with loving, serving headship, and with respect and submission, mirroring the relationship of Christ and his church. But he points husbands and wives to the greater mystery that marriage is pointing to, which it refers to, which is Christ and the church. That there's this immaterial and spiritual reality that's transcendent, that's greater than every human marriage. That human marriages are very good, and they're a worthy thing. They're made by God as a gift, but they're also made to picture something even greater, which is the union of Christ and his people in the gospel. But when he says that, we talked a little bit about Song of Songs. This goes back to the Old Testament survey we did when I covered Song of Songs a couple of months ago. I think the way that I put it is that Song of Songs is about marriage, the beauty and the glory of God's design for marriage and marital intimacy, and marriage is about Christ and the church. So we see a human couple delighting in each other in the Song of Songs, but it's all resonating to kind of a higher plane as it shows us things about the ideal, what was intended in God's mind, in God's purpose in instituting marriage, and that ultimately, again, is Christ's union with his people. So every human marriage falls short of that ideal. There are things in the Song of Songs that we aspire to. Obviously, it's a good picture of what Christ's people ought to see as the ideal of marriage, and what, by the Holy Spirit renewing us, we can and should strive for. But there's always going to be brokenness. There's always going to be disappointment. And what that ultimately is doing is pointing our eyes forward to the great marriage supper of the Lamb, the great consummation of our relationship as a bride, the church with Christ. But within that broad framework, we talked about this word desire. Remember in the curse in Genesis 3:16, when God is cursing the woman for what she did in sinning and eating the fruit, he says to her, among other things, that your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. And we interpreted that through the lens of just a chapter later in Genesis 4:7, when Cain is tempted. He's jealous about Abel's sacrifice, and God says, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you. You must rule over it. So this desire, in these contexts at least, because of this contrast with rule, desire seems to be kind of a confrontational, like this sense of striving against. And so the conflict in a headship and submission in a husband-wife relationship, the conflict and the friction is the product of the fall, not the ordering of the husband and the wife. We went over that. But I didn't talk about this. The only other time, the third time that word desire, that Hebrew word that's translated desire, is used in the Old Testament, is also translated desire, but it's in a very significant place. It's Song of Songs 7 verse 11, which says, this is the bride speaking, I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. And in this context, this is not a desire of strife and conflict. This is not a desire of usurpation and saying you have to keep that desire in check. Rather, this time notice, he desiring her. And I believe what's going on here is it's a play on that brokenness in the fall, the brokenness and the friction that the fall brought about between husbands and wives, which is related to our positions of authority and submission. But it's not just related to that. It's also just selfishness. It's just all the different ways that sin gets in the way of an intimate, loving, Christ-like, patient, kind union that God intended for husbands and wives to have as one flesh. But what's beautiful is Song of Songs is part of the wisdom literature. It's pointing ahead poetically at this ideal of a marriage in which the husband is desiring his wife, and it's a means of great security, a means of great delight for her. That's how it's functioning there in Song of Songs 7:11. So I love how the Bible kind of alludes to itself in various places. And this, in my mind, is a good picture of how we know that what Song of Songs is doing is picking up marriage, kind of dusting off the tarnish and kind of restoring this beautiful thing that God designed that points ahead to greater things to come. And yet us in our fallenness have seen so much ruin and loss and sorrow. So I hope that's an encouragement to you, whether you're married, just as an encouragement to be looking to Christ and walking by the Spirit and seeking to have our marriages be images of the beautiful union that we have with Christ. And if we're not married, it also, again, you're a part of the greater thing that's being imaged there, which is the church and her bond with Christ. So that's for all of us who know Jesus. We continue this Sunday in that series. Greg's going to be teaching. We're meeting at 9 o'clock as we do for Equipping Hour. We're having corporate worship at 10:30 as usual. We get to have more baptisms. 2 of our college students are being baptized, so that'll be really encouraging to see. And then we have community groups at 5 p.m. at various homes. And you can find out more details about that in the newsletter or in the bulletin. There are a number of other things going on for the church schedule-wise, so get familiar with that. But for now, I'll say goodbye and look forward to seeing you Sunday. All right, bye-bye.